What if the ones who hold the most power are the ones you never see, never hear, and never remember? The ones who vanish so completely they became the silence that bends reality without ever needing to touch it. There is a kind of fire that doesn't burn with heat. It doesn't crackle, it doesn't rage, it doesn't scream for fuel. This fire consumes without flame, transforms without noise, and leaves behind no ash. It's the fire that can't be fed, the inner blaze of those who have stopped needing anything from the world. It exists in only the rarest of beings, not because they sought it, but because they surrendered everything else. You won't see these ones. Not really. They don't parade their presence. They don't beg the sky for signs or kneel before the light for rescue. They've gone past the rituals, past the visions, past the hunger for healing. What they are now is something beyond form, beyond name, beyond duality. They are not here to save or to be saved. They are not afraid of the dark, nor are they seduced by the glow of the sacred. They are what remains when you stop reaching. And this is what demons fear. Not righteousness, not purity, not even light. They fear the ones who don't flinch, the ones who don't blink in the face of horror, the ones who meet the abyss without judgment, without resistance, and without identity. Because that stillness, that absolute presence, it offers no reaction, and reaction is the only way fear feeds. We've all been taught that power looks like strength, like volume, like charisma, but the rarest power, the one that makes even shadows recoil, is silent. It doesn't argue, it doesn't explain, it doesn't try to be known. It just is. A field of total awareness, a presence so still it becomes unbearable to those who carry need. Demons, like thoughts, like projections, like ancestral wounds, are attracted to movement. They circle you when you reach, they whisper when you yearn, they stir when you need to be loved, to be seen, to be validated, but when you sit, truly sit, with no craving, no performance, no identity to uphold, they don't know what to do with you. There's nothing to grab, nothing to poke, nothing to manipulate. You are empty. And empty is dangerous. You see, emptiness is not the absence of self. It's the end of illusion. It's what happens when every mask dissolves and the soul no longer wears a story. These beings, the 1%, have been emptied of need, of identity, of ambition, not because they were above it, but because they walked through it. All the way to its root, they sat with every wound. They tasted every lie. They bled for every part of themselves that begged to be someone, and when there was nothing left to fix, nothing left to hold, they stayed. They didn't reach for light. They didn't call down angels. They didn't chant for deliverance. They became the space that no longer required saving. And in that space, a different kind of energy took hold. Not bliss, not ecstasy, but something older, something colder, something so honest it strips everything false in its presence. This is why the elite 1% of dark chosen ones are feared, not because they command spirits, not because they chant louder than the rest, but because they are sovereign, they are untouched, they cannot be baited by praise nor broken by silence. Their power doesn't live in their words, it lives in their detachment. And that detachment is not dissociation, it is not numbness, it is clarity, precision, alignment with the eternal stillness beneath all things. They do not try to control outcomes. They do not ask the universe to rearrange itself for their comfort. They walk into the fire with no demand, no bargain, no exit strategy, and in doing so they become the fire. They are not gurus, they are not leaders, they are not examples to be followed. They are reminders, echoes of the silence that lives at the heart of every soul. They do not offer steps, they offer presence. And presence doesn't teach, it reveals. You know when you're near one. Your words falter. Your mind goes quiet. Something in your chest tightens, not in fear, but in recognition. The ego begins to panic because it senses what is about to die in that stillness. The need to be someone, the need to be seen, the need to be right. These chosen ones didn't choose to be chosen. They were carved by collapse, forged in the flames of nothing working, initiated by the absence of rescue. While others screamed for deliverance, they stayed. While others ran from the void, they listened. And when the darkness came, they didn't fight. They opened. Not all who enter the abyss survive. Some lose themselves trying to escape it. Some drown in the identity of being broken. But the elite, those rare ones who disappear into the black and return with no face, emerge as something else entirely. They don't shine. They don't glow. They don't float. They anchor. They root. They radiate a silence that rattles the bones of anyone still trying to be spiritual. They don't correct the world. They don't try to change you. Their power doesn't come from effort. It comes from absence. Their authority doesn't rest in opinion. It rests in frequency. You either feel it or you don't. And here's what makes it so terrifying to the ego. You cannot earn what they are. You cannot study your way into it. You cannot mimic your way into it. You cannot chant your way into it. Because what they've become isn't a result of gain. It's the result of total, unconditional loss. And almost no one wants that. To become like them is to lose every part of you that thinks it matters. It's to watch your identity dissolve like smoke. It's to sit in the ruins of your beliefs, your mission, your story, and ask for nothing to take their place. Not even God. Because this isn't about being good. It's not about being holy. It's not about becoming the highest version of yourself. It's about burning the very idea that there is a version to become. It's about surrendering the game entirely. And that, more than anything, is what the darkness fears. It doesn't fear your light. It fears your stillness. It fears the moment you no longer react. Because when you no longer react, you are free. And when you are free, you are untouchable. The fire that can't be fed isn't fueled by rage or passion or purpose. It's fueled by emptiness. Not the emptiness of despair, but the emptiness of truth. The kind that doesn't need to be spoken. The kind that doesn't move unless it chooses. The kind that makes the entire world pause and listen. Most people think demons fear the light. They don't. They've danced in the temples of the holy. They've memorized scripture better than saints. They've sat cross-legged beside the seekers, whispering affirmations into their ears while feeding on their need to be good. Demons don't tremble at candles or crystals or mantras. They wear robes just as easily as they wear shadows. Because light, when clung to as identity, is still ego, and ego, no matter how pure it pretends to be, can always be seduced. What darkness truly fears is something much rarer, something that offers no anchor point, no identity to stroke, no desire to exploit. It fears the one who no longer needs to be seen as light or dark, the one who has walked straight through both and come out the other side empty. You see, there are people who spend lifetimes trying to embody the light. They meditate, they pray, they purify, they perform, not because they love the light, but because they fear the dark. They want to be good, they want to be chosen, they want to be protected. But the elite, the 1% of dark chosen ones, carry no such fear. They do not worship light, nor do they avoid shadow. They stopped playing that game ages ago. The truth no one speaks is that the obsession with light is often the most sophisticated disguise of fear. The need to be holy, to be above, to be radiant, it's often the ego's final costume. But the elite have taken off every costume, even that one. They don't need to shine. They don't need to be seen as awakened or evolved. They don't need to be known as powerful. And because of that, nothing can reach them. They are not warriors. They are not fighters of evil. They do not draw swords in the name of righteousness. They are voids, empty vessels, mirrors with no agenda. And that kind of presence, it's terrifying to anything that feeds on identity. Demons know how to provoke the ones chasing love. They know how to seduce the ones still needing to be different, to be rare, to be wise. They whisper truths into the ears of the almost awakened, mixing purity with poison. You are special, they say. You are meant to lead. You are more awakened than the others. And just like that, the seeker is caught again, looping in another identity, another pedestal, another performance. But what happens when they whisper those same things to someone who doesn't care? What happens when the offer of divinity is met with silence? What happens when the visions they conjure, the feelings they stir, the memories they manipulate, fall into a space that doesn't react? They recoil. Not because the person is powerful in the traditional sense, but because they are unreachable. Power, true power, is not in resistance. It's in transparency. The elite have nothing to prove, so they cannot be baited. They have nothing to defend, so they cannot be attacked. They have nothing to protect, so they cannot be manipulated. They are unshakable, not because they are armored, but because there is nothing left to hit. They've already died. Not physically, but spiritually. They've let go of every title, every role, every version of themselves that needed to matter. They've let go of being right, of being good, of being sacred. And in that death, they found something deeper than virtue, something colder than courage, stillness. Not the stillness of meditation, but the stillness of total surrender. That stillness doesn't chant, it doesn't preach, it doesn't perform, it just witnesses. And demons, energetic parasites, ancestral forces, collective projections, cannot stand to be witnessed without reaction. They survive on response. They thrive on emotional feedback. But the elite offer none. Imagine this: a presence that listens to every temptation, every threat, every compliment, and says absolutely nothing in return. Not out of fear, not out of stoicism, but because there is no you left to respond. The ego is gone. The narrative is gone. The need to become is gone. What remains is pure presence. Empty, unfiltered, unshaped. And in that presence the game ends. The elite don't operate from polarity. They don't see light as better than dark or shadow as something to conquer. They see both as movements of the same energy, expressions of the same illusion. And they are no longer bound to either. They walk through temples and graveyards with the same gaze. They sit in circles of light workers and warlocks without flinching. They are not aligned to one side because they've become the field both sides play in. And when you become the field, the game cannot touch you. People often confuse this detachment with arrogance. They say the elite are cold, distant, unmoved, and they're right. But not for the reasons they think. It's not because the elite don't feel. It's because they've stopped leaking energy into places that demand reaction. They've stopped negotiating their essence for belonging. They've stopped explaining their silence to people addicted to noise. They're not passive. They're just done. Done trying to be understood. Done trying to save. Done trying to convert pain into story. They no longer translate their experience into language for the comfort of others. They no longer apologize for their emptiness. Because that emptiness is not a void. It's a sanctuary. And it's not empty in the way most people fear. It's empty in the way the sky is empty. Vast, still, complete. You don't need to fill the sky. You just need to witness it. That's what the elite become. A sky without a center. A vastness too wide for ego to grasp. This is why demons fear them. Because they can't find the edges. You can't tempt someone who doesn't want anything. You can't shake someone who has already been broken and didn't put themselves back together. You can't seduce someone who has burned every version of themselves and refused to rebuild. The elite don't seek alignment. They are alignment. Not because they found it, but because they stopped trying. And in that stopping, the current moved through them, not as power, but as presence. And here's what no one wants to admit. You can't fake this. You can't brand it. You can't market it. You can't teach a workshop on how to become it. Because it requires a level of surrender most people won't survive. Not because it's dangerous, but because it destroys everything you think makes you worthy. It dismantles even your sacred identities. It strips away even your holy suffering. It leaves you with nothing but breath and sky and the sound of your own heartbeat in an endless field of silence. Most people would rather cling to light, but the elite, they let go of both light and dark, and in doing so, they became something neither side can hold. Everyone wants to rise. Everyone talks about ascension, awakening, transcendence, as if truth is waiting in the sky, as if healing is upward, linear, celestial. But the real journey doesn't spiral up into light, it spirals down into silence, and then further into stillness so deep it unthreads the self. The elite know this, not because they read it, not because they believe it, but because they've lived it. They didn't find truth through radiance. They weren't lifted by the divine. They weren't kissed by angels or wrapped in the arms of the universe. They found truth in the ash, truth that didn't shine, but erased. They didn't awaken through bliss. They awakened through annihilation. They died without dying. And they didn't just visit the void, they made a home inside it. There comes a moment, if you're truly serious, when nothing works anymore. The practices fail, the affirmations sound hollow, the books read like lies. You sit in meditation and feel nothing but hunger, ache, and the echo of your own voice. And then silence arrives, not the peaceful kind, not the Zen garden kind, the silence that strips your name from your bones, the silence that listens to your soul's lies and responds with nothing. Not because it's cruel, but because it has no agenda. That's when the descent begins. The elite didn't plan their descent. No one does. You don't schedule the day you disappear. You just keep choosing truth until truth starts to kill everything that isn't it. And slowly your ideas about who you are start to unravel. At first it's emotional, then spiritual, then cellular. You wake up one day and the mirror doesn't recognize you, not because your face has changed, but because you're no longer playing a role. There's no character to uphold, no identity to defend, no purpose to chase. One of them told a story once, not to impress, not to teach, just to share the echo. 21 days in the desert, no food, no contact, no distractions, just wind, dust, heat, and silence. At first the silence felt clean, beautiful even, but on the 7th night it changed. It grew teeth. A presence arrived, not evil but ancient, not loud but hungry. It circled the tent like a memory too old to name. It didn't growl. It didn't scream. It whispered, softly, like an old friend, like a mother who knew every wound by name. It offered everything: power, clarity, devotion, a way out, a way up, a reason to matter. All he had to do was say yes, not even loudly, just inwardly, just bend a little, just agree that he was different, that his pain made him special, that he deserved to be followed, that his suffering earned him a place in the light. But he didn't move. He had already lost the part of himself that needed to be right. And the moment he stayed silent, the energy vanished. That's what demons can't touch. Stillness. Not practiced stillness. Not postured stillness. The stillness that arrives when you've been emptied of everything you thought made you worthy. This isn't taught in books. It can't be. Because most people want awakening to feel good. They want it to uplift. They want it to decorate their story. But the elite didn't get there through inspiration. They got there through collapse. Through sitting in rooms no one else could bear to enter. Rooms filled with ancestral pain, with lifetimes of shame, with the residue of 1,000 betrayals. And they didn't scream for help. They didn't ask for it to end. They listened, and kept listening, until even their desire to understand died. That's how they became sovereign. not through light, but through endurance. They didn't resist the dark, they outlasted it, not with weapons, but with surrender, with breath, with silence, with the kind of presence that lets every shadow speak and asks nothing in return. You have to understand, this isn't romantic, it's not glamorous, it's not marketable, it's terrifying. Because in that silence, you don't find your higher self. You lose your only self. You lose the one who's been narrating your life, the one who's been performing healing, the one who wants to teach, to lead, to matter. And when that part dies, there's a moment, maybe hours, maybe days, where nothing rises to replace it. You don't feel awakened, you feel erased. You walk differently after that. You speak less. You see through masks. You stop pretending to not see what you see. You stop explaining. You stop defending. You're no longer impressed by grandiosity or frightened by silence. You become the thing that no one can name, not because you're hiding, but because you're no longer playing the game that requires a name. And this is what sets the elite apart. They didn't climb ladders, they burned them. They didn't ascend, they descended. They entered the cave most people run from and found that the monster was not waiting to devour them, but to reveal them. The monster was silence. The kind that unmakes the ego in real time, the kind that shows you exactly how much of your spiritual identity is still performance. The kind that forces you to admit, you don't want truth. You want safety dressed up as truth. But they stayed. Not out of bravery, out of devotion to something wordless, formless, something that doesn't promise reward, something that can't be proven. And what they found wasn't a new self. It was no self. And that's the moment it happens. Not a vision, not a revelation, but a shift. A collapse of seeking. The realization that there's nothing left to gain. That even awakening is a story. That even the idea of transcendence is just another goal to die chasing. You sit, you breathe, you wait, and nothing comes. That nothing is the throne. The elite sit in that nothing, not because it makes them holy, but because there's nowhere else to go. Everything else is a performance, and they're done performing. Their presence is not a power, it's a side effect. Of surviving annihilation, of surrendering to silence so completely they forgot what it meant to want. The descent into silence isn't an event. It's a condition, a choice you don't make once, but again and again. Every time the ego rises to reclaim the throne, you offer it back. Every time a new identity wants to bloom, you bow and let it die. Every time someone begs you to play a role, you respond with silence. Because you remember what's waiting inside the silence. Not a crown, not a breakthrough, not an audience, just the truth. Unspoken, unshaped, unwilling to be anything other than what it is. They don't walk into the room needing to be felt. They don't carry their stories like trophies, or wear their past like a robe stitched from resilience. They've shed that, all of it. These are not the ones who overcame darkness to be applauded. They are the ones who let it hollow them out until nothing remained but breath and silence. You won't hear them recite their survival. They don't preach their trauma. They don't decorate their wounds with gold leaf and call it transformation. They simply stopped holding on to the pain that others build their identity from. Most people survive and then cling to the identity of survival. They build a story around it. They tell it over and over, calling it healing. They use their wounds as proof of wisdom, as access keys to spaces of respect. But the elite didn't do that. They didn't turn their pain into content. They didn't market their brokenness. They let it consume them. They didn't ask the wound to make them important. They asked the wound to show them what they really were beneath the importance, and what they found wasn't another layer of self. It was the end of self. That's the difference. There's a kind of healing that builds, and there's a kind of healing that dissolves. The first creates a better version of you, stronger, kinder, maybe more grounded. But the second one, it doesn't make you better. It makes you vanish. It takes your name and gives you no new one in return. It takes your titles, your worth, your sacred narrative, and drops it into the fire. And when you reach back for it, because you will, there's nothing left to hold, just ashes and breath. These are the ones who let go of everything. Yet, they didn't fight to be seen as whole. They didn't climb their way out of shadow just to be praised for their light. They let the shadow undo them. They sat in it, unmoving, until every belief, every identity, every borrowed truth slid off like old skin. They didn't try to grow from the pain. They let it unmake them. And they didn't rush the process. They didn't ask it to be pretty. They let it be brutal. They let it be quiet. And they didn't document it for likes. You see, there's something seductive about scars. They're proof we've survived. They're tangible. They give us something to point to when the world asks who we are. But the elite don't teach from scars, because scars are still story, and story is still self. They don't teach from what happened to them. They don't teach from what they've endured. They teach from what they've lost. Not possessions, not people, themselves. They didn't just forgive the past, they let go of the one who was hurt by it. They didn't just shift their mindset, they dropped the entire architecture of thought. They didn't just raise their frequency, they stopped broadcasting altogether. These are not people seeking to be known. These are not people clinging to their role in the awakening drama. They're not here to be spiritual. They're not here to be admired. They're not here to be understood. They are here barely, and even that is optional. Most of the world is addicted to meaning. Everything must be processed, interpreted, transformed. But the elite reached a point where even meaning dissolved, where the hunger to explain, to teach, to matter ended. And what took its place wasn't numbness, it was presence, sharp, alive, awake, but in a way that doesn't need language. This is what most people miss. They think awakening makes you more, but the truth is it takes everything from you, every idea, every self-concept, every sacred belief, until you're just there, silent, nameless, and whole, in a way that has nothing to do with perfection. Wholeness, not as completion, but as absence of division. They don't call themselves chosen. They don't name themselves at all. They don't hold space. They are the space. They don't guide. They don't lead. They don't seek to be followed, because they know what following creates: dependency, projection, hierarchy, all things that keep people clinging to form, and they no longer live in form. You can feel it when you meet one. Something in you pauses, not out of reverence, but out of confusion, because your ego is scanning for a story and there isn't one, no role, no identity, just this raw, steady silence. And if you're still holding on to yours, you'll either feel threatened or called. Threatened if you're still performing, called if you're ready to end the act. But they won't try to convince you. They won't invite you in. They don't evangelize. They don't persuade. They don't care if you see them. They don't need to be seen. They don't need to be right. They don't even need to be remembered, because what they are can't be remembered. It can only be felt, briefly, like a shadow at noon, like a stillness so complete you wonder if time just stopped. They don't anchor your attention, they free it. They don't pull you toward them, they vanish inside you. You think you're watching them, but you're really seeing what you've refused to let go of. They are not survivors, they are emptiers. They emptied out the need to survive, they emptied out the need to explain, they emptied out the myth of becoming. They didn't carry their pain forward as wisdom, they buried it as compost and never looked back. They are not standing on their healing, they are not branding their resilience, they are not turning their story into medicine, they are the silence that remains after medicine has failed. And from that silence, a strange and holy neutrality emerges, one that doesn't lean toward light, one that doesn't resist shadow, one that doesn't interpret reality through the lens of self. It simply observes. It simply is. And in that isness healing happens. Not because it's offered, not because it's intentional, but because presence is the original frequency, not the curated presence, just being, fully, without narrative, without goal. And most will never get here, because most people are still bargaining with the pain, still trying to use it, still trying to extract meaning from it, but the elite let it all go. They didn't alchemize the wound, they let the wound erase the alchemist. And in the space that followed, nothing rose. And that was the miracle. The final chain isn't fear, it isn't trauma, it isn't darkness. The final chain is goodness, that subtle, seductive need to be seen as sacred, the soft addiction to being perceived as kind, wise, awakened. It's the craving that hides under the robes of the spiritual identity, the one that doesn't scream. It whispers, be holy, but be known for it. Be enlightened, but let them see it. This is the last trap, and almost no one sees it until it's far too late. Most seekers aren't trapped in shadow, they're trapped in light, or rather, the performance of it. They believe they've escaped the ego, when really they've just clothed it in white linen and adorned it with mala beads. The old self dies and a new one emerges, softer, purer, and infinitely more insidious. Because this new self doesn't look like ego, it looks like healing. But it still wants to be seen, it still wants to matter, it still wants a throne, just a quieter one. The elite saw through this, not by studying it, but by being devoured by it. They wore the mask of holiness once too. They knew how to speak softly, to walk barefoot, to align their tone with the collective image of peace. They knew how to radiate just enough humility to remain untouchable, and then one day they looked in the mirror and saw a lie staring back, a well-lit, beautifully curated lie. That's when the mask cracked. They didn't rip it off in rebellion. They let it disintegrate, slowly, reluctantly, because even they had to admit the mask of goodness is the hardest one to remove, not because it's heavy, but because it's praised, rewarded, revered. When you wear that mask, people love you, they trust you, they follow you, and when you take it off, they don't just leave. You vanish from their perception altogether. You become invisible, unpalatable, too sharp, too quiet, too much. But the elite didn't come to be loved. They didn't walk this path to be followed. They came to dissolve. Not just their pain, their image. And not just the image the world projected, but the one they built for themselves. That was the last attachment. The identity of being spiritual, the role of being awakened, the title of being different. They let it die, and they didn't build another one in its place. That's what makes them unrecognizable to the ego. The ego looks for signals, clothing, language, energy, behavior. But when someone has let go of even the performance of divinity, the ego finds nothing to mirror, nothing to judge, nothing to admire, just presence, raw, unfiltered, still. That presence doesn't seek recognition. It doesn't feed on validation. It doesn't try to prove anything, not even its own emptiness. It just is. And that is what makes it so dangerous to illusions. Because when you sit next to someone who no longer needs to be seen as good, it reveals how much of your own self-opposition is still performative. The elite don't smile to be liked. They don't speak to be understood. They don't soften their truth so it can be digested by the masses. They speak when it's aligned. They move when it's required. And they never dilute the frequency to remain acceptable. They are clean not because they're polished, but because they're empty. You'll notice something else. They're not trying to change the world. They're not on a mission. They're not evangelizing enlightenment, because they've seen what missions become. They've watched sacred work turn into performance. They've seen truth twisted into brand. They've seen the light become business. So they step back, quietly, completely, not from apathy but from clarity. Because they know the moment you need to be seen as a guide, you stop being one. They're not interested in being spiritual, they're interested in being free. And freedom doesn't come from being loved, it comes from being nothing. Not a better version, not a healed version. Nothing. No title, no stance, no posture. People often ask, how will I know I'm free? The answer is brutal. You won't care who knows you're free. You won't need anyone to recognize your transformation. You won't wear your awakening like a badge. You'll walk into a room and leave no trace. You won't draw energy to yourself. You'll let it pass through you like wind through an open field. That's what the elite have become. Fields, not structures, not statues, not symbols. Fields, open, expansive, unbranded. And because of that, demons can't find them. Ego can't grab them. Projection slides off them. They are nothing. But their nothingness is not absence. It is power in its most dangerous form. Untouchable, unprovable, free. They don't use spiritual language unless it's necessary. They don't insert themselves into circles where identity is still currency. They don't argue about beliefs. They don't offer corrections. They don't defend their silence, because they've passed through the gate of needing to be known. And once you pass through that gate, the whole game changes. You don't just leave behind attachment to being right. You leave behind attachment to being seen at all. Can you imagine what that feels like? No applause, no reverence, no praise, no one knowing what you've done, no one recognizing what you carry, no reward, no narrative. Just you. The breath, the presence, the void. It terrifies most people, because the identity of good is the last safe place the ego hides. And to let that go feels like death. But the elite didn't fear that death. They let it come, and when it did, they didn't cling. They watched, they surrendered, and what rose afterward wasn't a better version of them, it was the end of versions. Now they move without needing to be holy. They speak without needing to be pure. They love without needing to be gentle. Because their love isn't filtered through the lens of goodness, it's filtered through truth. And truth has no need to be palatable. They are invisible now, to the world, to the system, even to themselves. But in that invisibility, they have finally become real. Real power is the quietest thing in the room. It doesn't enter like a storm, doesn't speak to command, doesn't gesture for attention. It does not need to. It's the one force that doesn't have to prove itself, because it carries no doubt. It simply is. Not loud, not dramatic, just undeniable. Like gravity. You don't see it, you don't hear it, but when it's there, everything shifts. When one of the 1% enters a room, they don't need to speak. The air thickens not with tension but with a strange awareness. Something ancient, something unsettling in its calm. People lower their voices. Some avoid eye contact without realizing why. Others suddenly forget what they were saying, because the field has changed. Time slows. The nervous system picks it up before the mind can process it, and that's the secret. Their presence bypasses cognition entirely. It doesn't impress the mind, it unsettles the illusion. They don't carry energy like an aura or a performance. They are the field. They've dissolved the self so completely that there's no gap between them and the present moment. No projection, no role, no hunger. They don't emit frequency, they become the frequency. And the frequency they've become isn't one of light or power or clarity, it's stillness. Not the stillness of meditation cushions and incense. Not the curated silence of a retreat, not a performance of peace. A bone-deep, reality-altering stillness, the kind that doesn't fluctuate. The kind that doesn't crack when provoked. The kind that doesn't shift to match the tone of the room. In fact, the room shifts to match them. You can't fake that, and you can't chase it, because if you're still trying to be powerful, You haven't yet touched the place where power begins. That place isn't a throne. It's not an image. It's not a vision of yourself as commanding or wise. It's the death of the one who needs power at all. It's the end of the one who wants to matter. You can only reach it by giving up every reason to reach for anything. And here's where most people get it wrong. They believe power is something they can learn to wield. They believe that once they're healed enough, wise enough, clear enough, they'll be able to walk into a room and command it. But the 1% don't command. They don't posture. They don't claim space. They become space. There's no one there trying to be anything. No one projecting significance. No one needing to be respected. The part of them that once chased reverence is gone. And what remains is presence, so clean, so still, that the illusions in others begin to tremble. Because presence that doesn't move exposes everything that does. Most people wear movement like armor. They fidget through conversations, perform empathy, smile when they're supposed to, nod to be agreeable. Even their spirituality is movement. Even their silence is performance. But the elite have stopped all of that. They've stopped performing, they've stopped adjusting, they've stopped aligning themselves to the comfort of others. They are not trying to be safe. They are not trying to be received. They are simply there. And because of that, everything false reveals itself in their presence. Words falter. Masks itch. The need to be liked suddenly feels unbearable. Because when you stand next to someone who has let go of every version of themselves, you begin to feel how tightly you're still clinging to yours. That's the kind of power that doesn't move, but moves everything. It doesn't lead with force, it leads with resonance. And resonance isn't something you emit, it's something you become when you're no longer seeking a reaction. That's why people are drawn to them without knowing why. It's not charisma, it's not magnetism. It's the absence of distortion. They are not broadcasting a message, they've become the frequency that ends all messages. You could sit next to them and feel your nervous system unravel, not because they're healing you, not because they're doing anything, but because their stillness gives you permission to stop pretending, to stop fighting, to stop holding yourself together. They don't ask you to be better. They offer you a field where better doesn't matter. And that's what makes them so rare, because almost everyone is still reacting to something: approval, rejection, validation, memory, even love. But these ones, they've stopped reacting, they've stopped resisting. And without resistance, power has no friction. It flows. Invisibly, irrefutably. They are not what you expect power to look like. They're not impressive, they're not charismatic, they're not trying to lead you anywhere. And yet, when they look at you, if they choose to, you feel more seen than you've ever felt in your life, because they're not looking at who you pretend to be. They're seeing through it, not judging, not analyzing, just seeing. It's terrifying the first time, because you'll feel naked, not physically but energetically. Every mask you didn't know you were wearing begins to burn. Every narrative starts to dissolve. And there's a moment, just a flicker, where you realize they could shatter you if they wanted to, not with words, not with presence, with silence. But they don't, because they have nothing to prove. They don't want to destroy you. They want nothing from you at all. That's the kind of power that can't be corrupted, because it doesn't need anything to sustain itself. It doesn't perform. It doesn't feed it. It doesn't react. It just watches, just witnesses. And in that witnessing, the entire fabric of performance-based spirituality begins to disintegrate. People think power is control. It's not. Power is what remains when the desire to control dies. Real power doesn't grip. It doesn't chase. It doesn't manipulate reality to feel safe. It surrenders. Completely. Not passively. Devotionally. It lets go so completely that even the desire to influence is gone. And here's the paradox. When you stop needing to influence, your influence becomes absolute. The elite 1% have entered that paradox, not because they wanted to, but because they were willing to lose everything else. They lost identity, reputation, purpose, recognition. They lost their name in the silence. And what remained was a presence so vast, so still, so empty. It bent reality without touching it. That's the kind of power we're talking about. The kind that doesn't need to move, because it already is the movement. The kind that doesn't ask to be seen because it sees everything. The kind that doesn't seek to be remembered because it's never truly gone. They don't announce themselves, but the room always knows they're there. There is a throne the world never sees. No crown rests upon it. No kingdom rises around it. No sword guards its base. It does not gleam. It does not command. It sits in silence, untouched, unnoticed by those still fighting for recognition. You don't reach this throne by winning. You don't earn it by being right or holy or wise. You arrive at it through disappearance. Slow, excruciating, complete disappearance of the self you thought you were meant to become. This throne cannot be seized. It cannot be claimed through brilliance, force, or virtue. It isn't the reward at the end of a heroic path. It's what appears when the path disappears. And the only way to reach it is to die the deaths no one volunteers for. Not the death of the body, the death of identity, the death of ambition, the death of the soul's need to matter. People think power lies in intensity, in movement, in making things happen. But the bloodless throne belongs to those who stopped moving, who stopped proving, who let the fire of their hunger burn itself out until even the ashes were silent. This is why so few ever sit upon it. Because sitting on this throne means you've emptied yourself of everything that could be provoked. Every emotional trigger, every sacred label, every polished scar. It means your need to be seen has starved to death in the cave of your own undoing. It means that you no longer reach toward anything, not light, not legacy, not even truth. You've stopped asking to be recognized. You've stopped asking to be healed. You've stopped asking. And in that surrender, something rare begins to take root. Not stillness as a choice, but as a condition, as a way of being. You don't become still, you are still, because nothing inside you is moving anymore. This is the power the world cannot grasp, because the world is built on battle. Win or lose, prove or collapse, perform or vanish. But the elite, the ones who reach this throne, opt out entirely. They don't win because they've transcended defeat. They don't even play the game. They don't raise their voice. They don't mark territory. They don't cast shadows. They walk in lightless stillness, and everything moves around them. What terrifies darkness isn't righteousness, it's emptiness. You cannot tempt someone who no longer wants anything. You cannot provoke someone who has buried every part of themselves that once cried out for control. There is no foothold for chaos in a being that no longer seeks order. That's the paradox. The more you fight darkness, the more it circles you. But the moment you stop resisting, stop proving, stop reacting, it has nowhere to go. Darkness only stirs what hasn't been emptied. The throne is called bloodless, not because there was no war, but because the war ended without a victor. It ended in total surrender, not defeat. Surrender. The kind of surrender that looks like stillness, but feels like death. The kind of surrender that unmakes your reflection until even your own name sounds foreign. And once that's done, once the self you've curated, healed, and performed has disintegrated, something strange happens. The world no longer affects you in the way it did. Praise feels like noise. Criticism feels like wind. Threats feel like dreams. You don't harden, you soften. So completely that you slip through the hands of fear without leaving residue. Most people think this sounds numb or dead, but it isn't. It's more alive than anything you've ever felt. It's aliveness without ownership, presence without personality. It's not disconnection, it's the end of distortion. and that makes it untouchable. You see, demons, whether psychological, ancestral, energetic, are not frightened by the light. They are drawn to it. They know how to shadow it, twist it, dress up in it. But they cannot latch on to stillness. They cannot cling to a presence that doesn't tremble. They cannot seduce someone who does not need to be chosen. And so the one who sits on the bloodless throne is left alone. Not abandoned, not isolated, alone in the most sacred sense. Sovereign, contained, whole without having to be complete. They are not leaders, they are not teachers, they are not examples, they are thresholds. You meet them and you remember, not them, yourself, not your story, your silence. They don't impress. They reflect. They don't direct. They disrupt. And it's not what they do that shifts reality. It's what they no longer need to do. Imagine being so still, so emptied, that timelines bend around your presence. Not because you cast spells or speak incantations, but because you are no longer participating in the illusion of linearity. You are no longer creating ripples. You've become the still surface beneath all motion. And, in that state, things begin to shift around you, gently, imperceptibly, and irrevocably. They say you cannot sit on this throne unless you've buried every piece of yourself that used to perform, not just the ego that wanted to be worshipped, even the ego that wanted to be helpful, even the one that wanted to be wise, even the one that wanted to be safe. Because all of it is attachment. And attachment is the final anchor that keeps you reacting. So the elite let it all go, and not all at once, not in a burst of enlightenment, in stages, in agonizing layers, one mask at a time, one story at a time, until there was nothing left but breath, until they couldn't even remember what it felt like to want to be seen. And that is when the throne appeared, not in light, not in glory, not in breakthrough, but in the silence between endings. There is no ceremony, no announcement, no arrival. One day you realize you haven't reacted in weeks. You haven't explained yourself. You haven't defended your path. You haven't needed to. You've become unprovokable, not by effort, by absence. And when something tries to stir you, an insult, a temptation, a compliment, you feel nothing, not numbness, not coldness, just stillness, just awareness. And in that moment you know, the throne has formed beneath you. It has no seat, no arms, no gold, just space. And for the first time in your life you take your place, not to rule, but to vanish. And in that vanishing, you become the one no darkness dares to touch. There's a silence that doesn't seek applause, a presence that doesn't angle itself toward recognition. It doesn't need a stage, doesn't seek a following, doesn't soften itself to be digestible. You walk past it and forget it was there, until something in you won't stop echoing. These are the unprovokable ones. They've stopped dancing for approval. They've stopped bleeding for connection. They've stopped offering themselves as examples of healing, of progress, of goodness. Their life is no longer a performance. It's not even a statement. It's a presence, so dense, so unmoved, that projection slips off them like rain off stone. They don't rise when threatened. They don't explain when questioned. They don't correct the world's perception of them, because they've stopped needing the world to perceive them at all. The part of them that once fed off being seen, whether through admiration or resistance, has died. And in its place is something so still it unnerves the ego still performing. We live in a world built on provocation. Entire systems are designed to poke you, pull you, bend you toward response. Media, relationships, religion. They don't care what you feel as long as you feel something loud enough to react. Every comment section is bait, every headline is a trigger, every praise is a hidden leash. But the elite, they don't bite. They don't rise. They don't answer to the call of provocation because they no longer have anything left to protect. Nothing in them flinches at misinterpretation. Nothing burns to be clarified. They've already let the world get them wrong and survive. That's the thing. Most people spend their lives trying to be understood. They refine their voice, they sharpen their beliefs, they build identity so meticulously crafted that being misjudged feels like death. But the elite have already died that death, not once, many times, until eventually they realized being misunderstood doesn't matter. Being unseen doesn't matter. Only presence remains, and presence doesn't need validation. They no longer translate their experience into palatable narratives. They no longer shape their truth for others to swallow. They don't simplify the complex, or decorate the sacred, or soften their edges for comfort. They're not trying to be digestible. They're not trying at all. They're just being. And that's what makes them so potent, because when someone no longer tries to be anything, they become everything. They don't post. They don't preach. Not because they're afraid of visibility, but because they've seen what visibility does to truth. They've watched it warp under the weight of expectation. They've seen how quickly truth becomes brand, how fast stillness becomes content, how presence becomes product. And they've walked away from all of it. They don't speak unless moved, and when they do, their words don't come wrapped in performance. They come wrapped in silence. You can feel it when they talk. The absence of agenda, the spaciousness between syllables, no push, no grasping, just clarity that doesn't bend to be light. You might think they're passive. You might think they're distant. But that's only because you've never seen someone who doesn't need you to see them. Their neutrality feels like coldness if you're used to emotional puppetry. But if you sit long enough in their field, you'll feel it. The presence behind the stillness, the gravity behind the silence. And you'll realize they're not detached. They're whole. That wholeness is what makes them unprovokable, not the absence of emotion, but the absence of emotional entanglement. They feel, but they don't collapse into feeling. They listen, but they don't absorb. They witness, but they don't react. Their nervous system doesn't scramble to fix or defend or rescue, it simply rests. Because they've done the work. Not the surface work, not the curated inner child work, not the light a candle and visualize yourself whole work. The real work. The messy, bone-deep, ego-shattering work of sitting in the dark with no rescue plan. Of facing every part of themselves that screamed for proof of worth and letting it burn. And when it was done, when there was nothing left to fix, they didn't run to rebuild. They didn't scramble to construct a healed identity. They let the rubble stay rubble. They let the dust settle. And in that quiet, something older than identity emerged. Something beyond name, beyond mission, beyond role. And from that place, they no longer needed to defend anything. You can't provoke someone who has no role to defend. You can't shame someone who no longer wears the mask of good. You can't tempt someone who's already fed the part of themselves that hungered for more and buried the body. Demons, projections, societal scripts, they all feed on need. Need to be loved, need to be seen, need to be understood. And these ones? They've starved those needs to death. Now there's nothing left to feed on, nothing left to stir, nothing left to seduce. They don't try to be unshakable, they just are. Because there's nothing in them left to shake. And this is what terrifies people, not because these ones are threatening, but because they mirror what's still stirring in you, the hunger, the need, the performance. When you sit in front of someone who doesn't respond, doesn't validate, doesn't give you the feedback you've learned to survive on, you start to feel your own emptiness. You start to question why you do what you do. And if you're brave, you stop pretending. That's their gift. Not teaching, not guiding, not speaking. Just being. Being so completely, so unapologetically, so utterly without reaction, that your own performance begins to unravel. And what's left is an invitation, not to become like them, but to become what remains when you stop trying to become anything at all. That's the final frontier. Not illumination, not transcendence, not purity, just presence. Naked, quiet, whole. And once you taste it, even once, you'll never perform the same way again. You'll still feel the pull to be seen, to be known, to be right. But you'll notice it now. You'll see it for what it is, a ripple in the water, a ghost from a life you no longer live. And slowly, with each breath, you'll let it go. Until one day someone tries to provoke you, and you don't even flinch. Not because you're above it, but because there's no one left inside who needs to respond. There comes a point where the ceremony ends, not because it wasn't beautiful, but because it's no longer necessary. The altar dissolves, the incense burns out and isn't replaced, the crystals gather dust, the chants go silent, and in that stillness something raw and holy begins to take shape. Not above the ritual, not beyond it, but deeper than anything it could ever summon. Because once you've walked through every sacred doorway and found that the threshold itself was never real, you stop knocking. You stop praying for permission. You stop calling in what you've already become. This is the place the elite reach. They don't burn sage, not because they're against it, but because they no longer need to clear what cannot stick to them. They don't recite mantras, not because words lack power, but because their breath has become the mantra. They don't call on guides, on ancestors, on divine allies, not because they've rejected help, but because they've merged with the current those spirits ride. They don't call in the sacred, they are the sacred, but not in some poetic saccharine way. In the quiet, terrifying egoless truth of one who has dissolved all separation. They are the ritual. Their presence is ceremony. Their silence rearranges the room. Their gaze unweaves falsehoods in others without ever naming them. They do not need to be witnessed, but when they are, the world tilts. Not because they push, not because they try, because the field they carry is so clean it exposes everything that is not. People used to say you had to call on spirit to be protected, that you had to raise your vibration, clear your field, draw your circle. And perhaps in the beginning you do. Perhaps when you are still tangled in identity, still porous with fear and fantasy, you need the smoke, the sound, the salt. But eventually the elite find that the need for ritual is not spiritual, it's psychological. It's a permission slip, a placeholder. And when the true power arrives, the permission slips burn. Not in rejection, in reverence. Because the elite honor the tools that carried them, but they do not stay inside them. They know the tools, like teachers, are meant to be outgrown. The ritual was always pointing to a state, not creating it. And once that state is embodied, the pointing becomes distraction. You don't need to call in presence. When presence is what you are, they've stopped performing sacredness. Not because they're skeptical, because they've gone beyond the performance. The candles, the prayers, the sacred music. It was beautiful. But eventually it became noise, echoes of a truth they had already merged with, like reading the same line in a book long after you've memorized it. They closed the book, not because they stopped learning, but because they became the center. This is not superiority. It is subtraction. Everything that is not necessary falls away, because they've tasted what lives beneath it, that quiet current, that infinite breath. The field of being that requires no instruction. It's not curated. It's not taught. It's felt. And when you've dissolved into it, you stop trying to access it. You stop setting the stage for presence and start becoming the space it requires. That's why energy moves around them, not because they wield it, because they are no longer obstructing it. Most people try to control energy, shape it, push it, manipulate it, with intention and technique. But the elite, they don't move energy, they allow it. Their field is so empty of obstruction, so clear of identity that energy has no choice but to flow. They don't block, they don't grip, they don't send anything. They become the condition through which energy reveals its own intelligence. And this is what most teachings miss. Power doesn't come from commanding energy. It comes from ceasing to interfere with it. It doesn't respond to performance. It responds to clarity. And clarity only arises when you're no longer trying to be spiritual. The elites have emptied themselves of the need to be seen as sacred. And that's what makes them sacred. They don't try to look holy. They don't posture peace. Their stillness is not rehearsed. It's earned. Not through discipline, but through disappearance. Through surrender so total that there's nothing left to light the candles for. They walk into a space and it changes. Not because they call in anything, but because nothing in them is blocking what's already there. You can feel it. You don't know what's happening, but your body starts to soften. Your breath deepens, thoughts get quiet, not because they're doing anything to you, but because your nervous system recognizes something ancient, something safe, something still. The way you feel standing in a forest that's never been cut, or next to a mountain that never named itself. That's what these ones have become. Unshaped, unnamed, unmoved, and in that unshaped state, everything false begins to tremble. Ritual was once a bridge, a sacred invitation to remember. But when you have nothing left to remember, when you are finally what the ritual was always pointing toward, you stop building bridges. You stop reaching across space. Because space no longer exists between you and the divine. There is no threshold, only presence, only now, only breath. And in that breath no candles need to be lit. You could sit with one of them and feel decades of noise begin to unravel, not because they healed you, because they gave you nothing to bounce off of. No role, no mirror, no feedback, just space, total space. The kind that reveals your own truth without telling you what it is, and that kind of space, it is more sacred than any ceremony. People might ask them, what do you practice now? They won't have an answer. Not because they're hiding something, but because there's nothing left to practice. Practice is for becoming. They've stopped becoming. They've started being. And being doesn't need a name. It doesn't need a process. It doesn't need to be offered to the sky or sealed with sacred oils. It just breathes. Just listens. Just watches. They are not the priest, they are not the temple, they are the silence the temple was built to contain. And when you sit next to them, if you're still looking for the ritual, you'll miss them entirely. But if you're quiet enough, if you're willing to stop performing, you'll realize you've just entered the holiest space you've ever known. No incense, no chants, no movement, just them. Just you and the infinite truth that no longer needs to be summoned. Love for most is a negotiation, a delicate trade of emotion, a constant shaping and reshaping of self in order to be received. Even the highest forms of love, spiritual, romantic, parental, often come with conditions stitched into them. Be close but not too distant. Be true but not too raw. Be generous but make sure I notice. For most, love is tethered to performance. And boundaries, they often arrive like barricades. Thick with resentment, heavy with defense, a final breath after too many silent betrayals. But the elite, the 1%, who have vanished every part of themselves that needed to be needed, have remembered something the world forgot. Love doesn't rescue, and boundaries don't require armor. These beings, the ones who've walked through fire not to be purified but to be emptied, no longer use love to fix or bind. They don't throw ropes to drowning souls only to wrap the other end around their own neck. They don't extend their energy with the expectation of being mirrored. They don't perform compassion as a way to feel valuable. They don't cling to roles, healer, guide, protector, because they've outlived the need for identity through service. Their love is clean. So clean it often goes unnoticed at first, because it doesn't rush in with urgency. It doesn't smother. It doesn't echo the dramas people are used to. It holds space, but it doesn't collapse into it. It sees pain, but doesn't try to erase it. It knows that to love someone is not to save them, but to trust that their fire, their ruin, their silence is part of their path. They don't confuse empathy with entanglement. This is the love that doesn't trap, that doesn't disguise control as care, that doesn't require the other to shrink or shift or glow for it to remain. It is presence without possession, attention without interference. And for many it feels strange, cold even, because when you're used to love as sacrifice, neutrality feels like abandonment. But that neutrality isn't cold, it's freedom. It's what remains when love is no longer a contract, no longer a leash, no longer a stage for proving worth. These ones don't rescue because they've learned the cost of false salvation. They've watched others crumble under the weight of being saved too soon. They've seen how quickly help becomes control, how easily support becomes a subtle violation of sovereignty. And so they step back, not out of indifference, but out of respect. They've mastered the art of loving without holding, giving without leaking, guiding without overshadowing. Their presence says, "I see you," without needing to fix what they see. They don't intrude. They don't over-identify. They don't get high off your healing, and they certainly don't twist your growth into a reflection of their own value. And boundaries? They don't announce them, because they no longer have to defend their energy. They've become sovereign within it. They don't need to scream no or build walls of ice around themselves. Their frequency does the work. When someone steps into their field with manipulation, neediness, projection, the energy bounces back, gently but unmistakably, not because they've shielded themselves, but because there's nowhere in them left to hold. They've cleared the receptors that once reached for validation or connection at any cost. Now, when the pull of emotional chaos arrives, there's no reaction, no entanglement, just clarity, just space. They walk in integrity so absolute you feel your own fragmentation standing next to them, not because they point it out, but because their presence leaves nowhere to hide. Their love holds no pedestal. Their no carries no apology. They don't shrink so others feel tall. They don't soften truth so others feel safe. And still, they're not cruel, they're not blunt, they're not angry. They're just unmoved, because they know to dilute their frequency for comfort is to abandon the truth they've died to become. They will not explain their boundaries. They will not defend their silence. They will not justify their distance, because their love is not designed to coddle you, it's designed to liberate you. And true liberation sometimes looks like walking away, like not picking up the phone, like not giving you what your trauma demands. They don't confuse love with enabling. They don't confuse service with surrendering themselves. They've already done the martyrdom spiral, already played the sacrificial lamb, already given until they disappeared, and then reappeared with a deeper truth. You can love without dissolving. You can care without collapsing. You can show up without vanishing inside someone else's storm. They no longer perform accessibility, and they don't respond to every reach. They don't make their light available on demand, not because they are stingy, but because they've understood the sacredness of containment. They've seen what happens when you give yourself to people who haven't yet remembered their own source. You become a replacement, a distraction, a crutch, and the moment you pull back, they call you cold, harsh, unloving. But these ones, they're willing to be misunderstood. They'd rather be misjudged than overextend. They'd rather be seen as distant than compromise their alignment. They don't chase connection. They don't mend what was never whole. They don't grieve the loss of relationships built on the performance of availability, because their availability is no longer for rent. And yet, if you meet them in truth, if you show up not to take but to meet, something opens, a vastness, a resonance, a warmth so deep it doesn't rise to the surface, but melts the edges of you from the inside. Because their love, when invited in truth, is complete. It has no echo of need, no shadow of expectation, no whisper of control. It's the kind of love that doesn't wrap you up. It sets you down, softly, clearly, fully. And if you ever walk away from one of them, you won't feel abandoned, you'll feel returned to yourself. That's the kind of love this world forgot. The love that doesn't rescue, the love that doesn't sacrifice, the love that knows when to step back, when to stay silent, when to hold the line. And in that knowing they become the example that no sermon can teach, no book can describe, no ritual can recreate, because they are the living embodiment of the truth. Boundaries don't need to be built when nothing within you needs to be defended, and love, when it's no longer tangled in fear, doesn't bind. It blesses and lets go. You won't find it in visions. You won't hear it whispered in mantras or etched into sacred texts. You won't stumble across it in your meditations or discover it on some mountaintop after a long pilgrimage. The throne, the real one, the only one that matters, is not placed in front of you like a prize. It doesn't wait for you at the end of some spiritual achievement. It doesn't shine, it doesn't sing, it doesn't even know your name. It only becomes visible after you've surrendered every reason you ever had for seeking it. Not just your ambitions, not just your ego, everything. The throne few will ever see is invisible not because it's hidden, but because most people are still looking with eyes shaped by wanting. You can't reach it with identity intact. You can't wear your healer robes here, you can't sit on it if you're still gripping to the story of what brought you to your knees. It doesn't care what you've survived. It doesn't care how many people you've guided, how many hours you've meditated, how deeply you've suffered, or how brightly you've shined. This throne only reveals itself when there's nothing left in you that needs to be seen. And that's why it's so rare. Not because the throne is rare, but because true surrender is. It is not a reward, it is a mirror. You don't find it, you become it. Or more accurately, you dissolve enough to recognize that it was never separate from you, it was just waiting, like the deep floor of the ocean waits for the storm to end. Still, unmoved, present beneath everything, and yet there is a reason it remains unseen by most. Because to see this throne, you must stop chasing thrones. You must stop striving for crowns made of reputation, of holiness, of applause. You must abandon the very idea that you are ascending. You must surrender your sacred ambition. You must die the death that takes even your sense of being a seeker. It's not dramatic. It's not loud. It's the kind of death that happens quietly while no one is watching, while your community still praises your light, while your online presence still glows with curated truth, while you still know how to say all the right words in the perfect sacred tone. It dies under all of that. It dies when one day the story you've built can't hold you anymore, and you don't try to rebuild it. You let it all fall. Not as rebellion, as reverence. And when it does, when every title, every symbol, every ounce of spiritual posture has slipped from your skin, something strange occurs. The throne appears. But it does not look how you imagined. There are no guardians, no angels, no booming voice saying, "Well done," no celebration of your arrival. Just you, sitting in the silence, realizing you've been here all along. And the silence? It doesn't feel blissful, not at first. It feels empty, unbearably so, because the part of you that wanted arrival is no longer present to enjoy it. And yet, that's the test. The throne doesn't ask, "Are you ready to rule?" It asks, "Are you ready to vanish?" Because this throne isn't about dominion. It's about disappearance. It's about finally sitting in a place within yourself so still, so emptied, that you no longer crave power, you no longer even recognize the question. This is not nihilism, it's not depression, it's not emotional withdrawal. It is what remains when the personal dissolves and the universal takes its place. It's not about becoming divine, it's about releasing even your attachment to divinity. The elite, the ones who have reached this place, don't talk about it. Not because it's a secret, but because words would cheapen it. They don't mark the moment they arrived. There was no arrival, no moment, no shift they could capture and retell. It happened like breath slowing in sleep, like forgetting a dream before you realize you're awake. And the irony? You've passed them. You've stood beside them in coffee shops, sat across from them in silence. You didn't recognize them because you were looking for light, for power, for something to orbit. They offered you none of that. Just space. Just presence. Just a mirror so clean it made you look away. Because their energy doesn't perform. It holds. Without agenda, without charge, without seduction. They don't want to be followed, they don't want to be remembered. Their presence isn't trying to imprint itself on you, it's trying to set you free from your need for imprinting. And if you're still seeking resonance, still scanning for who aligns with your truth, still defining yourself by who reflects your beliefs, then you'll miss them. Every time. Because this throne, this invisible, untouchable seat, is not about resonance. It's about emptiness. It's about sitting so deeply in yourself that you realize there is no self, not the kind you thought you were, not the seeker, not the teacher, not even the awakened one, just awareness, just breath, just this. This throne requires no defense. It invites no opposition. It exists outside of conflict, outside of polarity. It has no side. It has no name. And when you sit in it, truly sit in it, the world continues to turn, but it no longer turns you. Nothing can provoke you, not praise, not insult, not desire, not fear. You see everything, and you reach for nothing, not because you're detached, because you're whole. And in that wholeness nothing needs to be added, nothing needs to be fixed. You can cry, rage, laugh, make love, walk through fire, and none of it shakes the seat beneath you. You remain, present, unmoved, entire. This is the throne few will ever see. Not because it's withheld, but because most are still searching for a throne they can sit on and still be someone. This one only reveals itself when you're ready to be no one, when you're willing to burn every title, when you're willing to say, I need nothing, not even transcendence. And then you sit, not for applause, not for reward, just because it's time, because you have nowhere else to go, because there's nothing left to be, and in that moment what once was invisible becomes the only thing that was ever real. Most people speak of silence as if it were a sanctuary, a place to rest, a momentary escape from the noise. They light candles, close their eyes and seek the quiet like a balm, as if silence is soft, as if it is gentle, as if it comes to soothe. But the silence the elite know, the silence they've entered, endured, and finally become, is not peace. Not at first. It is not warm. It is not serene. It is not the romanticized stillness people try to conjure between emails and breathwork sessions. No. This silence is different. It doesn't hold you. It dismantles you. It doesn't wrap you in light. It strips you of shape. It doesn't offer clarity. It annihilates the one who needs it. There is a silence that begins where all other silences end, a forbidden silence, not because it's hidden, but because very few dare to stay inside it long enough to be transformed. Most visit, briefly. They dip a toe, feel the stillness swallowing them and retreat, back to the familiar chaos of thought, back to the warm noise of identity, back to the predictable rhythm of self-definition. Because to stay in this silence is to die, not the death of the body, but the death of all you thought you were. And most aren't ready for that. The silence doesn't arrive with grace. It doesn't ask permission. It enters like a void and begins removing everything it touches. First it takes your voice, not the physical one, but the internal narrator, the one who tells the story, the one who whispers, "This is who you are." That voice falters, then fades. Next, it takes your name, not your label, not your birth certificate, the felt sense of you, the way you orient in a room, the way you track yourself in conversations, the way you subtly hold posture and opinion and self-position without realizing it. That scaffolding begins to crumble. And then it goes deeper. It begins peeling away the sacred masks, the healer, the empath, the spiritual one, the kind one, the honest one, the awakened one. All of them, even the masks you were proud to wear, especially those. Because silence doesn't care about your alignment. It doesn't care how deep your truth feels when spoken. It doesn't care about your healing journey or how many wounds you've transcended. It only asks, what remains when all of it is gone? And when it asks, it does not wait. It begins, layer by layer, memory by memory, belief by belief, until even your connection to the divine feels like a construct, until even your sacred longing feels like noise. And what remains is a space so empty, so complete in its voidness, that the ego doesn't just panic, it disappears. It cannot breathe here. It cannot narrate this. It cannot convert it into meaning, because meaning requires separation. And in this silence, there is none. The elite didn't stumble into this silence by accident. They didn't read about it in a book or encounter it in a guided meditation. They found it by being stripped, by choosing to go inward so completely that every layer of false self fell away, and then not turning back. They sat in it, not for minutes, not for hours, for days, for weeks, for lifetimes, in silence so total it crushed their need to become. And in that crushing, they became unrecognizable, not just to others, but to themselves. There is no mirror in this silence, no reflection to hold on to, no image to adjust. You don't sit inside it and affirm your light. You don't affirm anything. You sit, and you vanish, and you realize the you that vanishes was never real, just a pattern, just a collection of stories with emotion sewn in. That's what silence shows you, not the beauty of yours, but the unreality of everything you thought was necessary to hold it. It shows you the hunger you've built your identity around. It shows you the emptiness behind your achievements. It shows you that even your spiritual self is a costume, stitched from longing. Most people can't face that. They want silence to be peace. They want it to affirm their depth. They want it to reinforce their chosen identity. But this silence doesn't affirm anything. It removes everything that can be affirmed, and it leaves you in the wreckage, alone. That's the point. To face yourself without any self to hold on to meet the void without reaching for language, to sit in the nothing and let it become the everything. The elite have done this, and they don't talk about it, not because it's secret, but because once you've gone that deep, words become absurd. Trying to describe it is like trying to bottle the sky. The moment you speak it, you've already distorted it. So they go quiet, and their quiet carries weight. You feel it in their presence, the absence of hunger, the absence of self-concept, the absence of performance. It's not that they're neutral, it's that they no longer generate the illusion of personal identity. They walk through the world as echoes, as silence in motion, as breath made flesh, and when you meet them you feel your own noise rise, not because they provoke it, but because they offer no distraction from it. That's the true power of the forbidden silence. It reveals everything by doing nothing, and most aren't ready to be revealed like that. They want guidance, not erasure. They want elevation, not destruction. They want transcendence, not vanishing. But the elite didn't come to transcend. They came to disappear. And they did. Now they carry that silence, not as a tool, not as a technique, but as the very fabric of their being. They don't bring peace. They are what remains when the war ends and there is no one left to claim victory. They are not here to comfort you. They are here to reflect what silence has already taken from them. And if you can sit with that, if you can sit with them without asking to be held, without asking to be seen, without needing anything to be affirmed, you might begin to hear it. The edge of that silence, the doorway to that space where everything you believe about yourself starts to crumble. And if you don't run, if you stay, you'll begin to disappear too, not into darkness, but into the truth that never needed to be spoken. Demons do not fear strength, they feed on it. They circle the ones who wear their power like armor, who flex their light like a weapon. They admire the warriors, the defenders of truth, the spiritual champions who chant loudly and declare their alignment with the divine. They watch those ones closely, not because they are threatened, but because they are entertained, because strength still reacts, light still flinches. Sacred names still burn with identity. But emptiness? Emptiness cannot be touched. It has no edges, no desire, no response. It doesn't rise in defense or fall in defeat. It doesn't light up when praised or dim when rejected. It simply remains, unmoved, unimpressed, unavailable. And that is what demons truly fear. Not the fire of conviction, not the armor of discipline, but the vast, still ocean of a soul that no longer needs to be anything. The elite, the rare few who have burned through every version of themselves, have reached this state, not by striving, not by conquering, but by releasing. Releasing not only the falsehoods and fears, but the very structures they once believed made them whole. They let go of their brilliance, their sacredness, their healing, their story, and at the end of that descent they found something so simple, so complete, it cannot be described. Emptiness, not the absence of meaning, but the absence of grasping, not the absence of life, but the absence of clinging to it. Most will misunderstand this. They hear emptiness and think of hollowness, numbness, despair. But the emptiness the elite carry is none of these. It's not a wound. It's not a hole waiting to be filled. It is fullness without form, the kind of fullness that does not crave expression. It does not need to be known. It does not need to move, and because it does not move, it cannot be manipulated. Demons, whether energetic, emotional, ancestral, collective, thrive on movement. They feast on resistance, reaction, ambition. They want something to push against, something to provoke, but in the presence of emptiness they find nothing. No hunger to exploit, no fear to amplify, no identity to mirror. It's like trying to catch air with a fist. The moment they reach, it's already gone. Emptiness doesn't deny, it doesn't resist, it doesn't rise, it watches, it witnesses, and in that witnessing, the game ends. Because the game requires participation, it requires a player. But the elite no longer play, they have stepped off the board, they have stepped out of the illusion, and not in theory, in practice. They live without needing a name, they walk without leaving a trace. They speak only when silence tells them to, and even then the words come from a place so empty they cannot be twisted, because there is no self behind them to defend or glorify. People ask them, "What are you?" And the answer, if they choose to give one, is silence. Or maybe a soft smile, or maybe a wordless gaze that reflects everything back at you without taking any of it in, because they are not here to explain. Not because they don't care, but because explanation is noise, and their being is built on the absence of noise. They have become untouchable, not invincible, not impermeable, untouchable, because there is no surface left to grab, no hooks left to pull, no levers left to twist. Every access point has been surrendered, every attachment has been burned. They don't protect their energy. They don't shield, they don't fight, they don't need to, because nothing can land where nothing clings. You could throw an insult, and it would fall silently to the floor. You could offer them praise, and it would vanish before it reached them. Not because they're indifferent, but because they've transcended the need to be affected. The winds of opinion no longer move their leaves. The tides of emotion no longer pull at their roots. This is why their presence is so disorienting. You walk away feeling something shifted, and you don't know why. Because they didn't offer advice, They didn't mirror your pain. They didn't even seem to respond. But in their stillness, everything you brought to the surface was revealed, and none of it was fed. And in a world built on energy exchange, on reaction, on mutual identification, that kind of emptiness feels like a threat. Knowing that it's not a threat, it's a liberation. It's a mirror so clean it doesn't reflect you, it dissolves you. And what remains in its gaze is the truth. Not a truth you can quote, not a truth you can turn into content. A truth that unravels your self-importance until you are as still as they are. This is why demons back away. Because they know they cannot possess what does not want. They cannot manipulate what does not move. They cannot seduce what does not crave. They cannot enter what has no door. Emptiness is not absence, it is sanctuary. It is the space where all distortion collapses, not by force, by lack of fuel, where anger fizzles, where shame has no echo, where fear withers like smoke with no fire. The elite sit inside this space. They walk with it, breathe with it, speak from it, but they do not carry it like a badge. You won't hear them talk about their emptiness. They don't flaunt their sovereignty. They don't declare themselves beyond reach, because even those statements would be too loud for what they've become. They are silent not just in voice, but in frequency. No flare, no ripple, just stillness, just presence, just the echo of what once needed the world's attention, now collapsed into nothingness. And yet, in that nothingness, they are more alive than ever, not distracted, not divided, just fully here, unbothered, untethered, and wholly unprovokable. This is the kind of presence that shifts reality, not because it imposes, but because it leaves so much space that the truth cannot help but rise in its wake. There's no ritual that leads here, no mantra, no initiation, only surrender, and not the surrender most people think of, not the spiritual act of bowing in devotion, the raw, involuntary surrender that comes when you've been stripped of everything and still choose to stay, when you've lost every mask and don't reach for another, when you realize that the final protection isn't light, it's nothing, and in that nothing, you become the one thing demons can't touch, because they can't find you, because you're not playing the game, because you're not pretending to win, because you're not even on the field. You are watching, you are witnessing, you are remaining, and that is what makes you untouchable. At the end, there is no ceremony, no light breaking through the clouds, no divine voice welcoming you home, no audience bearing witness. The final transformation doesn't look like power, it doesn't feel like ascension, it isn't even beautiful in the way people hope. It's quieter than silence, lighter than absence. The final becoming is not about becoming anything, it's about becoming nothing, and in that nothing, everything dissolves. And in that dissolving, you don't disappear, you vanish into everything. Most spend their lives climbing a ladder they believe leads to enlightenment, each rung another version of the self, wounded, healing, awakened, chosen, teacher. They collect titles like sacred souvenirs, lightworker, mystic, shaman, channel, seer. At first, these names feel like liberation, a way to shed the old skin, but soon they become cages, gold-plated, comfortable, revered, and incredibly difficult to release. Because they're not just identities, they're scaffolding, proof of progress, proof of meaning. But the elite, the ones who crossed the last threshold, didn't just share the names the world gave them, they shared even the ones they gave themselves. Not out of shame, not out of rebellion, out of necessity. Because at the edge of everything you realize that even your sacredness is a story, even your deepest identity is just another costume stitched from longing. And the moment you recognize that, something begins to unravel. You don't let go of who you were, it lets go of you. It slips from your field like mist, and you are left not as someone holier or more powerful, but as no one at all. Not numb, not absent, but empty in a way that feels like purity stripped of pride. You don't rise in glory. You dissolve in stillness. You don't shout your truth. You forget your voice. You don't light the world. You stop needing light. This is the death people fear the most, not physical death. Ego death is a nursery rhyme in comparison. This is the death of your sacred self, Himin. The part of you that needed to be seen as rare, needed to be known as chosen, needed to be remembered as the one who reached something others hadn't, that part dies screaming, because it believes it's the culmination of your journey. It believes it is you, but it's not. It's just the last veil, and when it falls, the world doesn't change. You do, but not in a way that anyone would notice. That's the secret. The final shift doesn't make you louder, it makes you invisible. Not because you're hiding, but because you've stopped needing to be seen. You stop leaving footprints. You stop making ripples. You stop announcing your frequency to the room. You just exist, and in that existence, the space around you bends. Not to your will, but to your absence of will. You become the shape of nothing, and in that shape you become the container of everything. You don't lead, you don't follow, you don't even stand still. You dissolve. And from that dissolution, the world moves. Not because you push it, but because you no longer resist it. You become gravity without mass, fire without flame, light without contrast. The elite don't want to be remembered. They don't care about legacy. They don't need to be feared or admired or documented. They don't want their words quoted. They don't want to be etched into history as someone who knew. They don't want followers, not even silent ones, because the very idea of being followed implies that someone is still trying to be something. And they are done with that. They want nothing, not out of nihilism, out of completion. When you've truly emptied, wanting becomes a memory, not something to be fought, something that simply no longer arises. You don't crave recognition, you don't crave comfort, you don't crave clarity, you don't even crave presence. You are presence. And presence doesn't perform, it doesn't seek, it doesn't chase, it simply breathes, silently, consistently, eternally. That's what these beings become. Not statues of wisdom, not icons of divinity, just breath. Just the sacred inhale that no one notices. And in that inhale, entire systems shift. People don't understand how someone without ambition can change a world built on noise. But that's exactly why they can. Because they're not trying to change anything. They've left the circuitry of cause and effect. They've exited the loop of resistance. They don't throw stones into the pond. They are the stillness of the water itself. And in that stillness, timelines rearrange. People feel it. They just don't know what it is. They enter a room and feel safe without understanding why. They feel a weight lifted without being touched. They feel less alone in the presence of someone who says almost nothing. And when they leave, they might never think of that person again, but something has shifted. That's how the elite move now, without needing to move. They've become the atmosphere, they've become the space in which healing happens, not because they offered it, but because they no longer blocked it. Their emptiness invites others to drop their identities. Their silence gives permission to stop performing. Their lack of needing allows others to feel, for the first time, what it's like to simply be. This is the end of the journey, not a peak, not a prize. A disappearance so complete that there's no one left to want a rival. And this is why so few complete it. Because they don't want to vanish. They want to shine. They want to glow. They want to be remembered as the one who reached the top and waved down to those still climbing. But the elite don't wave. They don't stand at the top. They don't even stay visible. They merge with the silence, and the silence becomes them. And the world, though it may never know their name, shifts in their wake, not because of who they were, but because they finally stopped needing to be anything at all.